Buried beneath a fortress of ice, his body lay untouched for over 5,000 years. His skin, leathery and bronze, stretched over frozen bones. His eyes, closed for millennia, still hide the final moments of his life. This is Ötzi, the Iceman, a man who walked the high peaks of the Alps during the Copper Age and never returned. Found by chance in 1991, his corpse was so perfectly preserved that every wrinkle, every strand of hair, even the contents of his stomach, were still intact. But beneath the frozen silence of his grave lay secrets that would rewrite history. Who was he? A humble herder? A skilled hunter? Or a fugitive fleeing from an unseen enemy? For decades, scientists have searched his DNA for answers. Now, a revolutionary genetic breakthrough has uncovered the truth about his origins, a truth more astonishing and more unsettling than anyone imagined. Could this frozen traveler be the key to unlocking the hidden migrations of Europe's first civilizations? The year was around 3,300 BCE. In the heart of the European Copper Age, villages dotted the valleys of the Alps. Metal tools were rare treasures. Trade routes stretched across mountains and rivers, carrying obsidian, salt, and copper between distant tribes. Yet life was harsh. Winters were merciless, and war between clans was never far away. On a high ridge between what is now Italy and Austria, Ötzi took his final steps. His body froze into the glacier, sealed under layers of ice and snow. For millennia, storms raged above him, but his silent tomb never yielded its secret. When hikers stumbled upon him in September 1991, scientists instantly knew this was no ordinary discovery. This was the oldest intact human ever found in Europe. Radiocarbon dating confirmed his age, over 5,300 years old. But the real shock came when early DNA samples hinted at an ancestry unlike anything expected in the region. If true, this would mean that Ötzi's people had origins far from the Alpine valleys, possibly rewriting the genetic map of ancient Europe. It started with a single hair. Under the microscope, Ötzi's hair revealed traces of ancient copper and arsenic, evidence he had worked with metal before his death. But more importantly, that same strand carried fragments of DNA still clinging to its core. In the sterile laboratories of Innsbruck, scientists carefully extracted genetic material from his bones, teeth, and skin. At first, the data was incomplete, degraded by time, damaged by ice. Yet, in 2012, advances in genome sequencing allowed a complete mapping of Ötzi's genetic code for the first time. The results were puzzling. His DNA carried markers rarely seen in modern Europeans, but common in isolated populations of the Mediterranean. Even more strange, Ötzi had no trace of certain genetic traits common in Alpine peoples today. It was as if he had stepped straight out of a genetic time capsule, a living fragment of a vanished civilization. Each clue pointed to a journey far older and more complex than anyone had imagined. Teams of geneticists, anthropologists, and archaeologists united to follow the trail hidden in Ötzi's DNA. They compared his genome with thousands of ancient and modern samples across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The patterns began to emerge. Ötzi's closest genetic relatives weren't in the Alps at all, but on the islands of Sardinia and Corsica, hundreds of kilometers away. How could a man with such origins end up frozen high in the Alps? The investigation widened. Pollen analysis from his gut revealed he had traveled from a valley forest to alpine meadows in the days before his death. His clothes, stitched from goat, sheep, and even bear fur, told of a man adapted to harsh climates, perhaps a skilled traveler or trader. But there were shadows too. A deep arrow wound in his shoulder, cuts on his hands, bruises on his body. The final days of Ötzi's life seemed to be a desperate escape, not a peaceful journey. The turning point came when scientists used next-generation DNA sequencing to cross-reference Ötzi's genome with newly uncovered prehistoric remains. The match was undeniable. Over 90% of his ancestry traced directly to early Neolithic farmers from the Mediterranean, specifically populations that settled on Sardinia thousands of years ago. This was not a coincidence. It was a genetic fingerprint frozen in time. The data revealed another surprise. Ötzi had lactose intolerance, meaning he could not digest milk, even though dairy farming had already begun to spread through Europe. His blood carried a rare genetic mutation linked to heart disease, and his gut contained traces of Helicobacter pylori, a stomach bacterium that still plagues humans today. This wasn't just ancestry. It was a living medical record from the Copper Age. For the first time, science could state with certainty. Ötzi was a direct descendant of the first wave of Mediterranean farmers who migrated north thousands of years earlier. Picture the scene. Late spring, around 3300 BCE. Ötzi moves through a narrow alpine pass, the wind slicing against his face. He carries a copper axe. Rare, valuable, and possibly worth killing for. Days earlier, he had descended into a valley where fresh pollen from flowering hazel trees clung to his clothes. But something went wrong. The cuts on his hands tell of a fight. The arrow wound in his shoulder pierced deep, shattering an artery. He fled upward, into the thin air of the mountains, perhaps hoping his pursuers would give up. His last meal, unleavened bread, dried ibex meat, and fresh herbs, sits heavy in his stomach as he collapses on the ice. Snow begins to fall, covering his body. The cold is merciless, but it is also a gift. It seals him away from rot, time, and decay. For 53 centuries, storms rage above his frozen tomb, until the glacier finally surrenders him to modern eyes. Ötzi is no longer just a body in the ice. He is a messenger from the Copper Age, carrying in his cells the story of an ancient migration that shaped the very fabric of Europe. His DNA proves that the first farmers from the Mediterranean did not just settle in the south. They journeyed into the heart of the Alps, leaving traces that still echo in isolated communities today. His wounds whisper of violence, his tools of innovation, and his preserved body of a life caught between survival and tragedy. Even after 3 decades of study, questions remain. Who fired the arrow that killed him, and why? Was he a leader, a traitor, or a hunted man? The ice kept his body intact, but perhaps the land itself keeps his secrets. If you want to uncover more of humanity's frozen past, hit the like button, subscribe, and step with us into the next great mystery. The past is not gone. It waits just beneath the ice.